ladies and gentlemen, it's your boy GS Luke DFS here for our weekly course breakdown, this time for the John Deere Classic. Now this week, not one of the sexier weeks that we have on tour, both from a venue and a field standpoint. A lot to be desired there. I mean, TPC Deere run kind of similar to TPC River Highlands, extremely straightforward, not all that much that makes it unique. And from the field perspective, no one in the top 50 of the official World Golf rankings, so might leave you thinking what's to like about this week. But if you like money, you like actually going out there and profiting when you're going and playing DFS, and this is the week for you, because with that lack of excitement and really attention span when it comes to this event, comes a larger edge when it comes to DFS, particularly from the outright market, playing on prize picks, whatever the case may be. With diverted attention this week between the LIV Tour and the PGA Tour, it leaves a great opportunity for GFS golf enthusiasts like myself and for all of you out there watching this video to go and capitalize. So I'm excited from that perspective, maybe not so much from the actual golf at hand, but still something I'm looking to take advantage of. And here in this video, going to cover everything you need to know to get you prepared to do exactly that. We'll talk about the golf course, we'll go hole by hole, breaking down exactly what the players will be expecting this week, as well as some of the key stats I'm using to identify my top plays this week, as well as a few golf courses around the PGA Tour that are going to play similar to what we'll see at TPC Deere Run that we can use for a little bit of our analysis as well. So by the end, going to know everything you need to know for the outright betting or DFS golf perspective. Excited to get into it, a lot to talk about though, so let's not waste any time at all. Alrighty, so TPC Deere Run, that is the course for this week in Silvis, Illinois. It is a DA design, so an architect we don't see all that often on the PGA Tour, and in terms of his actual style, not really one we know all that much about, so not going to harp on that all too much, but wanted to introduce the architect as he deserves that recognition. It's a par 71 setup, 7,289 yards, and last year played among the easiest of all courses on the PGA Tour schedule. That was a 69.51 scoring average, which for a par 71 is right around a stroke and a half under par. So out there, you're going to see plenty of scoring, and in general, it's a well-balanced golf course. It's not a course where you have to be elite in any one category. If you go out there and have a well-balanced approach, gain 3 or 4 strokes to the field in every category, which is asking a ton, right? But if you can average that across all 4 categories, probably lifting the trophy by the end of the week. So we'll talk about exactly what you can kind of hunker down on this week, which there are a few key stats that I'm really looking at, but in general, kind of like what we saw at TPC River Highlands, a little bit of a straightforward golf course. Like I said, it doesn't really have anything that really makes it unique, but let's just go through the metrics as we usually do here with a golf course. Last year, it ranked among the lowest penalty strokes of any golf course on tour, only about a quarter of a penalty stroke per round. So while there are a few water hazards out there, they weren't particularly in play, not like what you'd see at a TPC Sawgrass or a TPC Southwind that always rank among the top in terms of penalty strokes per round. The greens here, relatively small, so similar to what you saw at TPC River Highlands. The greens here are 5,500 square foot per green on average, which is right in line with what we saw for last week. They're going to be running at 12s on the stimp meter. That is coming from the GCSAA. And last year, they were hit at a 73.5% rate, which was extremely high. In fact, a whole 5.3% more than the tour average. So also similar numbers to what we had last week for TPC River Highlands. So expect to see extremely high GIR numbers. They're bent grass greens running at 12s on the stimp meter, like I said, which is also pretty much directly in line with what we had last week. The fairways are also a little bit wider than PGA Tour average. They are 36.5 yards wide, which is just a yard and a half more than what we're used to seeing. But they were hit at a 71.4% clip. That is 5.5% more than the tour average. So kind of similar to what we saw at TPC River Highlands, where the fairways were slightly larger than average. They were hit at a much higher clip. So that's the same story we have here. So whether it's the undulation on the fairways, whether it's the fact that they're just more receptive in general, you're going to see slightly higher fairway numbers around this golf course than what you're used to seeing, at least week to week on the PGA Tour. The rough is a 4-inch Kentucky bluegrass, which yet again is the same exact story that we had at TPC River Highlands, which You probably can guess it. A concourse later on is going to be TPC River Highlands, but just from a skill set perspective, we're looking at I want to say a strikingly similar golf course. Just accuracy off the tee is slightly more important than your distance. I'd say even more so around TPC Deere Run than what you saw at TPC River Highlands. Approach play is going to be there, right? You're going to have to gain to the field with your approach play to have any chance of actually winning the golf tournament. But what's far more important is going out there and gaining with the flat stick. These greens have undulation to them, just like what you saw last week, but not anything that's going to really fool players. It's not, an Augusta National type of level, a Memorial Park golf course type of level, or what you see at the Charles Schwab Challenge where you're going to have putts where you're aiming 90 degrees away from the hole. Here you're looking at like a foot, maybe a foot and a half breaker at the very most, or like 20 to 25 feet. So that's why the scoring is as solid as it is here, with the fairway percentages being higher than tour average. Same thing with the GIR percentages, again, being right around 5% higher than what you're used to seeing. With putting not being all that difficult here, you're going to see low scores. You're going to see players that keep it in the fairway all day or hitting pretty much every single green. And with all of those birdie looks, somebody's bound to cash in for 6 or 7 birdies. So with a par 71, I'd expect to see some 62s, potentially even 63s out there throughout the weekend. I wouldn't expect anyone to get close to a 60 unless we get some extremely damp conditions through the first 2 days. Those greens on Friday or Saturday get extremely receptive. Then maybe we see some extremely low scores, but as per usual, the winning score is usually close to 20 under par. Last year it was minus 19 with Lucas Glover. In the last 4 years prior to that, it was taken deeper than minus 19 though. So I'd expect to get back to that trend. Again, particularly if we get any sort of rain over the weekend. Any type of rain would make the greens even more receptive than what we've seen in the past. It would make this place utterly indefensible at that point. It would be a birdie fest beyond any birdie fest that we've seen for the last month or two. Alrighty, so we've got the hole-by-hole analysis up. Let's go ahead and just take a look at what these players are looking at. So for hole number 1, it is a 396-yard par 4. Realistically, a lot of players aren't going to hit driver here. There's not really any reason to push it down there. 300, 310 yards. Just hit something out here, an iron, maybe a 3-wood if you really want to push your luck down between these bunkers. In either circumstance, though, you're going to have a 9-iron at the very most, if not a wedge into one of these front pin locations. So it's a handshake like we're used to seeing on most of the PGA Tour courses out here. And realistically, you're going to see a lot of holes like that, where you're not even having to take driver off the tee, and you're still setting up wedges into these greens. And if you're going to be more aggressive, you might have something like a 50 to 60 yard pitch shot. So we'll talk about this with the key stats, but those 50 to 125 yard wedge shots are going to be something that I'm at least hunkering down on for a little bit of an edge here. Hole number 2 is a par 5, 562 yards, dogleg to the right that is reachable for the entire field. The tee shot also plays downhill. It's a little bit hard to hold the fairway because it is downhill, but if you're going to get some rain, they're going to be a little bit more receptive than usual. This is going to be an eagle look for the entire field. Just hit this fairway, you're going to have something like 250 yards at the very most into the green. If not you're going to see players that get close to this crossroad up here, right? Where they're hitting it out there like 360 yards off the tee. A lot of that due to the downwind, also downhill nature of that tee shot, but something in that 170 range into a massive green. You can see this green complex among the biggest that you'll see on entire property, and an eagle look for a lot of the longer players on tour. Hole 3 is 186 yards, a par 3, so not much to speak of there. Going to be a mid-iron for much of the field. A few of the pin locations can be a little bit dicey, but should be a birdie look for pretty much all 4 days. Hole 4 is 448. You do have a split fairway up there, which can make things a little bit dicey with the tree in the middle of the fairway, but avoid that. Get into the short stuff here and set up a wedge into this green. Most players are going to hit driver to take that out of play there and have something like 100 to maybe even 80 yards into the green here. The more aggressive drivers that have a little bit more length, that can get it out there, 310 yards on carry, something like that, they're going to have a true wedge into every pin location on this green. And if they're going to tuck it over here on the right side or the back left, having that flip wedge into the green is especially helpful. So it's one of the few holes where you can leverage some of that distance. But even if you're, a shorter hitter, right, only hitting it like 290 with your driver, like a Steve Stricker, 4 or 5 years ago, who has still competed at this golf course, you're still going to, you're only going to have what, like 130, 140 yards into this green. It's not going to be anything to worry about, right? So that's why those wedge ranges are going to be especially important this week on pretty much every hole, even the 450-yard par fours. Hole number 5 is 432, so kind of similar to the last hole there, except that in the fairway you do have a rough patch, so you're kind of limited on how far you can push it up there. Majority of the field is most likely going to hit a 3-wood here, and then something like an 8 or 9 iron into this green. So another birdie look, especially for some of the longer players that might even have a pitching wedge into that green. Hole 6 is 369, and this is borderline drivable. Now, most players aren't going to actually get it up there. Most of them are just going to hit it to this layup zone here, just with an iron off of the tee. But if you wanted to be aggressive about it, I mean, realistically, you could get it up to within 40, 50 yards of this green. It's slightly uphill. It's a yard uphill, so not really that much to speak of. It's just, you're not really gaining all that much by trying to drive it up there. I mean, realistically, push it down to the end of this fairway landing area, put yourself within 110 yards of this green, and hit that perfect wedge shot, right? So that's why you've seen a lot of shorter hitters have success here, because on a lot of the quote-unquote drivable par fours, you have the rough in front of the green. You have a little bit of a defense here because this is 4-inch Kentucky bluegrass. This isn't just like 1.5-inch Bermuda grass, 2-inch Bermuda grass that these players are used to all day long. It's some pretty gnarly stuff, particularly if it rains a few days before the event. Then it'll get even gnarlier for these players. So I think that's why you've seen a lot of the precision guys having success over the guys that are power hitters here. So certainly a hole where strategy is going to come into play. Hole 7 is 226. It is a beast of a par 3, so one of the harder holes you're going to have on the entire property. This fairway bunker over here to the left doesn't come into play, particularly with some of the left side pin locations. You also have a tree that comes into play on this left side, so definitely just try to get on this green in 1-2 putt, get out of there with a 3. I think most players would be pretty satisfied with that over the 4-round period. Hole 8 is 434 yards, straightforward hole, slightly dog legs from left to right. Hit a solid drive, put a mid-iron in your hand, and while it's on the quote-unquote harder side of the golf course, it's nothing to worry about, right? It's just a mid-iron at most, and the hard holes here, right, are the 200-plus yard par 3s, and then when you get over 400 yards for your par 4s, which, oh boy, right, a 400-yard par 4, typically we're worried about those 500-plus yard 4s, which you do get one on property, which is what you're going to get here at hole number 9. This is by far the hardest hole on property. That's why I said, A9, this is the quote-unquote hard part of the golf course, but this is the only hole that I'd even call hard here, right? On the left side, you do have OB, so if you were to miss wildly left of this cart path, you could get OB, but you have quite a bit of room there. You can get blocked out by some of the trees over here to the right, but you have in a massive landing area, right? So even the hardest hole in the golf course isn't going to be all that bad because you're going to have a wide open landing area. You're going to be in this fairway hitting into a 200-plus yard shot, right? But it's also one of the larger greens on site. It doesn't have a fairway bunker, or I should say a greenside bunker right in front of the landing area, so you can roll up shots onto the surface if you happen to miss that aircraft carrier-sized fairway out there. So it is the hardest hole on property, but nothing that I think is going to trip up players too much. Hole number 10, you do have that OB down the left, so like I said, you do not want to be over there. I believe it's only like 5 to 10 yards off the left side here. So if you end up starting at hole 10, even though it is a par 5, watch out because you have the OB down the left. You also have a lake the whole way towards the green on the right side. So if we zoom in on that, this should be a 3-shot hole for a majority of the field because if you decide to go for it in 2, you bring this water into play. So unless you're absolutely mashing it off the tee, getting it out there 330, 340 yards, you're probably laying up to this wide landing zone right here and then putting either a 90 to 100 yard wedge shot into your hand. So again, another hole where that precision game is going to pay dividends over that power game. Hole 11 is 430. It's a straightforward par 4. Another one of those holes with a landing zone, so it kind of limits your distance off the tee. You'll see plenty of the power players just hitting an iron here. Some of the shorter hitters perhaps hitting a 3-wood, but in either circumstance, you're hitting to the same landing zone and hitting a mid-iron into this green. So another hole where precision is king over power. Hole 12, 212 yards for a par 3, so another beast of a par 3. Also, the pin locations can be especially difficult around this green complex. So depending on where they put this pin, particularly the front right or even the back right pin location, can be especially devilish. Hole 13 is 420 yards, another hole where you're going to have a wedge in hand. Get it out there in the short stuff, probably with a 3-wood. You don't really need to hit driver here, and you're going to have a prime birdie opportunity. So, regardless of your distance off the tee, going to be among the easiest holes on property. Hole 14 is the same story. Now, this is the quote-unquote drivable par 4. It's 360 yards. It plays 11 yards downhill, so it plays significantly downhill. So getting it out there 270, which is where they have the marker right here, that's hitting like a 5-iron off the tee for some of these tour pros. You're going to see people try and drive it on this green. There is a little bit of undulation that will kick balls left into this bunker, also kick balls right over to the right side of this green. So it's not the easiest surface to hit, but even if you lay up with a 3-wood, guys that are longer off the tee like a Cam Davis this week, they might just hit 3-wood off this tee and end up right here, for 30, 40-yard pitch onto the green. So it's certainly going to be a birdie opportunity for the field, but it's not an easy one to actually get on the surface. Hole 15 is 480 yards, relatively long par 4. The drive is relatively difficult, but you at least have a large enough landing area here. You just don't want to miss left. Missing to the right would certainly be preferable over missing into those trees on the left side, but massive green. So even if you miss here, you're getting a large enough green area to make up for it. So just try to get out of there with a par, right? Kind of like the 500-yard hole number 9. Just want to get out of there with a 4 every single day and let yourself do the scoring on holes like 13 and 14 that were extremely easy, less than 400 yards, or hole 16, right? That's only 157 yards. That could be a pitching wedge for some of these longer players like a Cameron Champ. So you're going to see plenty of scoring out there. Hole 16 is certainly one of those holes. Hole 17, another scoreable hole, 570 yards for a par 5. Just get it in the short stuff, and it's reachable by the entire field, right? So if you decide to lay up, there's a pretty decent sized landing zone for that, but I don't see many players laying up. Just, if you happen to hit a horrible drive, block yourself out, sure, lay it up here to the second shot zone, but a majority of the field will be at least around the green here in 2. And finally, hole 18, it's not the easiest finishing stretch, particularly because of that lake down the left side, but it's an easy golf course with not that bad of an ending, right? If you pull your shot into the lake on the left, first off, shame on you. Miss anywhere else around this green complex and you're probably going to be okay. So you'll see a lot of, I say the tee shot might be the hardest part here because you do have to kind of curve it around the corner. So if we go back to the tee shot, you can see it's a dogleg to the right, but it's a lot more of a dogleg than you can actually see on here. There's trees here on the right side. If you miss into the trees, you're going to be laying up because there's no way to really hit it through the trees and onto the green. So the tee shot, sure, okay, you got to nut up and hit a fairway here, but you're hitting a 3-wood, right? It's not going to be that difficult to hit the short stuff here. So, just don't overcomplicate things off the tee. Maybe even hit an iron off the tee to get it in the short stuff here. Get on the green in 2-putt here. This isn't a hole that you really want to mess around on because, like I said, if you get out of position here, you're most likely laying up and, setting yourself up for a bogey. So it can be a fun finishing stretch because we know on the 18th tee, particularly if you haven't won before on tour, which this event has a habit of having first-time winners, you might have, that Mito moment on 18 where you end up shanking it into the trees on the right? Then it makes things interesting from an entertainment perspective. But, as long as you execute here in 18, I don't think it's all that much to worry about. We'll have to see. Again, we've seen some crazy stuff happen at these PGA Tour events here over the last 2 to 3 months. All right, we've gone through the course. Now let's talk about what I'm using to identify my top plays. So the key stats for analysis. And number 1, we have shots gained putting. Like I mentioned before, the greens here, easy to hit. Fairways, extremely easy to hit. So as a result, most guys are going to have plenty of birdie looks, regardless of your skill with those irons. At smaller greens, at courses that play more difficult, there's a premium on that ball striking because you see a huge separation between the field. Guys that'll still hit 13, 14 greens around a track like Riviera Country Club, and then plenty that are only hitting 5 to 6 that are absolutely getting butchered out there. That's not what you see around this venue. A bad round when it comes to fairways is hitting like 8 or 9 fairways out of 14, right? At other golf courses, you can go around a track and only hit 3 or 4 fairways on a day. At this golf course, a bad round is, 12 or 13 greens, as opposed to most golf courses where a bad round is like hitting 7 to 8 greens. So just different levels when it comes to solid play and then below average play at this golf course. But the one thing that is a key differentiator, right, is the putting, because if you're cashing in with a lot of those 20 footers, I mean, even just making 2 to 3 of them on a round, you're going to gain a stroke and a half to the field with those 3 putts alone, let alone if you can be consistent from that 5 to 10 foot range, which is where you just really make almost all of your strokes gain putting up, because those are where you're dealing with 50 percenters, which that's right around a 7.5 to 8 foot putt. But especially those 8 to 10 footers where you're talking about, the 35 to 45% hit rate, that's where you really start to gain half a stroke every time you make those onto the field, which, that's how you gain 3-4 strokes putting to the field in a single round. So that's what I'm looking for this week. If you look at the past champions, a lot of them, maybe not the best putters on tour, but guys that can go out there and spike with it. Lucas Glover, maybe the one exception there. He's usually really bad with the flat stick. Last year went out there and just took it apart with his wedge play. But Dylan Fratelli, he's a spike putter. Steve Stricker, who's had a ton of success here, tends to be a spike putter from time to time. And Bryson DeChambeau fits that bill as well, particularly when he was early in his career. He wasn't a consistent putter, but we know him now as one of the best putters on tour. He would tune into that from time to time. So if you're going to look at any one key stat, I think putting is the number one thing to look at, but don't completely exclude players just because they're a loser long-term with the flat stick, right? If they've shown an ability to turn it around, even for just a 2 to 3 round sample size, that is intriguing enough to keep them in the player pool. So don't take this as the gospel here, right? It's not all about putting this week, but it is a sure nice thing to have in your back pocket. Next up, we've got shots gained approach, which is always important when we're looking at golf stats, but particularly this week with the wedge range. So that 50 to 75 yard range, 75 to 100, 100 to 125, so on and so forth, right? 125 to 150 are going to be especially important here. With all those very gettable holes, you're going to have one of those wedges in hand. Whether you're a long player, somebody who's one of the shorter hitters on tour, you're going to be pretty much laying up to the same spot as somebody like a Cameron Champ. While there are a few holes that are exceptions, right, like the drivable par 4 14th, the one quote-unquote drivable par 4 that you have on the front 9 there, I believe it's hole number 6, while those can be advantageous if you have that length, they're numbered, right? Most holes, most of the time when we go hole by hole, almost every single hole you have options, right? Where you can push it down there, you can create a better angle, or put a wedge in hand where other players are going to have mid-irons. That is not the case here, right? It's just for those 1 or 2 holes, for example. So definitely looking at those wedge ranges, the players that really differentiate themselves when they have those wedges in hand are going to be very much so guys that I'm looking at this week. Next up, we've got driving accuracy, which off the tee, this is certainly a precision over a power course. So for a lot of the reasons that I like wedge players this week is also why I'm taking a look at guys that are just accurate off the tee. In general, the guys that are a little bit more accurate also tend to be a little bit more strategic. And around TPC Deere Run, which is an easy golf course, it's one that you got to think your way around. I mean, there are places that you just absolutely can't miss it. Though the 157-yard par 3 is easy there at hole number 16, if you miss on the left side of that green, you can make it 7 or an 8 very quickly there. I mean, you're dealing with like a 30-yard hill to hit off of. I would just know from playing in PGA Tour 2K, it's a pretty much impossible shot to hit. So even in video games, you can't get up and down from that spot. I mean, you're talking about video game ability, right? Not real life where these guys, it's almost impossible to hit that 40-yard flop shot. So definitely want to be keeping yourself in the short grass and in general just playing a little bit more strategic. A few other key stats I'm throwing into the model. Got birdie or better percentage. That's always worth a look at a birdie fest, which that is certainly the case this week. Taking a look at shots gained putting on bent grass, so not just shots gained putting in general. Also going to take a look at who plays well on this surface specifically. Taking a look at shots gained at easy golf courses, so places that we would consider birdie fest, quote unquote. And lastly, the shots gained approach ranges. So I'm taking a look at the 125 to 150 range a little bit extra, that 100 to 125 range, and that 50 to 125 range. So depending on what database you look at, a lot of them segment these out a little bit differently. Just take a look at those shorter ranges, right? Regardless of the actual distance, the guys that are good across the board there are certainly worth a few extra looks this week. And now lastly, let's look at some of the comp courses. So as I mentioned before, TPC River Highlands certainly on the list, but not at number one, believe it or not. My number one comp course here is going to be TPC Twin Cities. The main reason for that is first the setup, right? Both of them, same setup there, par 71. But more importantly, a golf course where precision off the tee is the name of the game, but you have to make a ton of putts. The greens aren't all that hard to read. It's a little bit less of a birdie fest there at the 3M Open than what you'll see this week at the TPC Deere Run, but you're still looking at a similar skill set for success. When I run my correlation modeling, this course came up by far number one when it came to correlation between the players that played well at one golf course versus the other golf course. Number two was TPC River Highlands, which obviously when we went through the analysis, I mentioned all the correlations between them. So from the eye test, that certainly makes a lot of sense there, but was actually slightly less correlated to success than a few of the other courses. So that's why it's there at number two. Certainly from the narrative standpoint, will be something that I'm keeping a close eye on, particularly because it was the course for last week's venue. So we can get a lot of our recent form metrics from there as well. Taking a look at Silverado Resort and Spa, that is the home of the Fortinet Championship. Out there on the West Coast, another birdie fest positional golf course. Not all that long. Got to take advantage of the par fives when you get them. So I'm taking a look at that. A few others I don't have listed. I'm taking a look at Detroit Golf Club, which is a birdie fest up there for the Rocket Mortgage Classic golf course where Cam Davis has won. So spoiler, might be taking a look at Cam Davis this week. And also taking a look at Sedgefield Country Club, the home of the Wyndham Championship. Another positional golf course where you can take it pretty low, but a lot of that has to come with the flat stick. So just obvious parallels between all five of those venues there, and stats, or I should say courses, where I'm pulling stats from to try and get an idea of who to target this week. Alrighty, that's all I've got for the course breakdown, guys. Hopefully you feel at least a little bit more prepared for this week than you did before. I know it's not a real fun one, a little bit more of a dry week from a field and course perspective, but hey, we're going out there to try and win some money. We're worried about the ROI perspective more than the actual play. So, it's one for the actual golf enthusiast out there rather than the guys that are just hopping in for the major championships, right? They'll be paying the rake for us this week. They'll rage enter or tilt enter a few lineups, particularly for Showdown over the weekend this weekend. So excited for that front too. So before you hop on out of here, make sure you go ahead and comment down below what you guys have as your winning score. For me, I'm going to take 22 under par. I think you see a lot of good scoring out there, but make sure you go ahead and let me know your thoughts down below. And also, before you hop on out of here, go ahead and smash that like button, right? It lets me know that you're enjoying this type of content. You want to see even more course breakdowns going into the future. And also, make sure you are subscribed to the channel as well. That way you don't miss any of the content I am dropping in the future. That includes my fantasy content, which I'll have core picks for this week coming out tonight. It'll be for the Draftkings DFS side, and prize picks, DFS Showdown content, which for this week, we are going to be covering the Live Golf event, which they're doing in Portland this week, Pumpkin Ridge Golf Course, and Draftkings has already posted contests for Showdown there. So they don't have like 3-round contest for them yet, which I'd expect, obviously they've got to get a few of the kinks out of it because it's only 3 rounds rather than 4, but we've got Showdown to work on there. So if you're looking for content on that side, make sure to keep an eye out for that too, because I will be dropping plenty of content for there. So looking forward to it, guys. It'll be a busy week in the golf world. Just really excited to see how these events turn out. I mean, you have the weak field in the PGA Tour side, so I think a lot of people are going to tune into the Live this week. And frankly, the field's a lot stronger over there. So I think we've got some good options to look at this week. And in general, more golf is better. So pretty excited for it. So in either way, guys, I appreciate you stopping by. I'll catch you guys next time.